I love making pulled pork, especially when I can take the time to smoke it, but that takes about 8 to 10 hours depending on the size of the pork shoulder. So I figured out a way to utilize the pressure cooking function and the air crisping function of the Ninja Foodi to get the same results that I get on the smoker, minus the smoke flavor, but it's absolutely delicious. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. Today we're gonna make pulled pork, but not just your ordinary pressure cooker pulled pork. We're gonna make a pulled pork that is very similar to the pulled pork that I made at my restaurant. I owned a barbecue restaurant, which some of you know. Of course, we smoked our meat, so we did it over a wood smoke. We're not gonna get that flavor, but this came so close that it is absolutely delicious and oh my gosh, so easy to do. First thing we want to do is get a rub on our pork shoulder. This is a bone-in pork shoulder, but you could use a boneless. That's no problem at all. You will need to adjust your time up for a boneless, which is opposite of what you do in the oven if you're making a roast in the oven. But because of the way the pressure cooker works, it's about density, and I have found that you do need to go up on your time. So add about 10 to 15 minutes to your pressure cook time if you have a boneless pork shoulder. This one's bone in, it's 7 pounds. 7 pounds, I'm gonna pressure cook for 70 to 75 minutes, probably 70 minutes. So let's get the rub on. Now I'm using my own rub. This is a rub we used in our barbecue restaurant, and I have a very similar recipe that I use for my ribs, and I definitely will share that with you in the written post. It's just too many ingredients to go over right now on camera, but I definitely will share the recipe in the written post for this, or you can use your favorite rub. Now I'm gonna use the rack to put the pork on, and I've already made sure that it fits. This is a good tip though. When you get your pork shoulder, whether it's bone in or bone out, it's usually in a sealed bag, put it on the rack and make sure it fits in the pressure cooker. Because if it's too tall and it's going to come up too far and your pressure lid's not gonna go on, then you need to come up with another way to elevate it that isn't quite as tall as the rack. That's when a sling comes in handy because they're a little bit lower profile. But this one fits on the rack, that's what we're gonna do. Since I'm gonna make sure that I put the fat cap on the top, so usually when you get a pork shoulder, you'll see there will be a fattier side. You want that facing up, and that's just to make the second part of the process a little bit easier. So if I look here, you can see there's not that fat cap. Nice marbling, but no fat cap. But on this side, there's the fat cap. So I'm gonna keep it up like this, but to rub it, I'm gonna turn it over first. That way I can just flip it onto my rack and do the rest of it, okay? So I'm gonna get my hands cleaned up, and then we're gonna get to rubbing this spice blend all over the pork. So when I'm applying a rub to any sort of a large piece of meat, I always keep a clean hand and a dirty hand, and I put more rub than I think I'm gonna need into a bowl, and then I use like either a tablespoon, or in this case it's a half of a tablespoon, and I'll sprinkle it right over the top here and rub it in. Or pat it in, that's fine too. Now you can actually do this ahead of time if you want, and keep it in the refrigerator unwrapped for a day or two. I've done that before and it works really, really well. Or you could do it like I'm doing it just before we pressure cook. You need a good amount of rub on any kind of a large roast like this, whether you're gonna smoke it or pressure cook it. And it's interesting to me that the pressure cooking does not mess up the rub. Even though it's a wet environment, it's perfectly fine. It works great. So I definitely recommend rubbing it before you pressure cook. It's gonna make it a lot easier for the second step. Now I'm just gonna go along the sides and do the same thing. Okay, that looks good. And now I'm gonna flip this over and put it onto the rack. I'm gonna try to do this with one hand. Yay, I did it. And now we're gonna get the other side done. The amount of rub you use is totally up to you, but I like to get a nice coating. This brings in a lot of flavor to the final product, but I also like to keep some extra because I actually add more of the rub in right before serving, just to give a little boost of flavor. It's so delicious. Okay, now we're gonna go into the pressure cooker. I'm putting in 1 cup of water here. And we'll lift this in. Now it's gonna touch the sides a little bit. Don't worry about it. Just push it down. You know, depending on your size of your meat, it's gonna definitely touch the sides, but I don't worry about that at all. As long as it's not coming up to impede the pressure cooker lid, you're perfectly fine. Then line up your arrows. Make sure your valve in the back is to the sealed position. Hit start. We're gonna go to pressure cook, high is what we want. And I'm gonna go to 70 minutes for this. After the 70 minutes is up, I'm gonna go to a full natural release. That means I'm not gonna touch the pot at all. All right, so once the 70 minutes or 1 hour, 10 minutes is up, we are gonna do a full natural release. And that means I do absolutely nothing with the pot. I let the pressure naturally release until the pin in the back drops. So once the pin drops, you can open up the lid, and then we're gonna move on to the second step of this recipe, which is using the air crisping lid to develop that crispy bark that everybody loves. All right, so it took about 18 minutes for the pin in the back to drop, and now we can open up the lid. Do that away from you because it's gonna be very steamy. All right, now it's not gonna look like much, I'm gonna warn you, okay? But it gets so much better after the next step. All right, so now carefully pull it out with the rack. I like to put it on a cutting board. Then what I'm gonna do is empty this liquid out. And I usually strain it, and then I'll let it chill, and I'll have some pork fat if I wanted to do something with that, or I have some juices if I wanna do something with that. So there we go. I don't really worry about cleaning out the pot or anything like that. I do take this off the rack because if we put this in the rack and we try to go with the air crisping lid, it's gonna sit a little bit too high. So you could put it on a sling, but what I do is usually just pick it up, not with my hands though, pick it up with some tongs here, or meat, whatever you wanna call these things, and just sort of put it in here and get a good hold on it and lift it in and put it in there. All right, now we're gonna go under the air crisp setting on 300 for 1 hour. You can check this and you can adjust the temperature up if you need to, but the idea is that we are gonna render this fat under a low temperature. It's gonna become nice and crispy and crackly, and we're gonna develop a nice bark in places and then some of that crispy fat. And that is what's so delicious when you mix it in with your pulled pork. It makes pulled pork so much better. All right, so hit that. I'm gonna go all the way down to 300 and take the time up to 1 hour. The moment of truth, and it looks beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Now I'm going to attempt to lift it out. Now you could definitely pull it. So if you wanted to pull all of it right now, you can definitely do that right in the pot. There's gonna be fat down at the bottom that's rendered out, but that is going to help keep all your pork juicy and flavorful. So don't worry about that. Or you can do what I'm doing, which is gonna attempt to pull it out without it falling apart. All right, there we go. It looks absolutely gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And this fat has rendered and crisped up. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. All right, so now the moment of truth. Is it cooked enough? If it's not cooked enough, put it back in and keep going on the air crisp setting. You're not gonna ruin it, I promise you that. All right, let's see. Let's go in here and just see if we can pull it, and it is pulling out perfectly fine. Wow, look at that. Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. That is so great. All right, so as I pull this, I'm gonna put it into a bowl over here that I have so I don't run out of room on my cutting board. Or you could even pull it in the bowl if you wanted to, although this is a good amount here, so I don't know if it would even fit in there. All right, and I like it to be chunky, so I don't pull it real fine, but you can, of course, chop it up however you like. So once I get all of the pork pulled off of the bone, then I like to go through these pieces. This is the crispy fat that we rendered. And I like to incorporate that into the pork. It adds so much flavor and great texture. All right, so now we're done, and I'm gonna put this all into my bowl here. Now, I don't mix mine with sauce. I put sauce on when I'm, on my sandwich or however I'm eating it. But you certainly could mix in sauce if you want to. One thing that I do is put on some of that rub. So I just sort of sprinkle it over the top, and then I'll take some tongs and kind of move it around and sprinkle it a little bit more just to season all the meat a little bit. And that's just my preference. You don't have to do that. And then we have our beautiful pulled pork. It just looks amazing. I cannot wait to make my sandwich. Now, one thing I'm gonna say is that it took a little bit more effort to pull than it has previously. And I went the 70 minutes because I had a smaller pork shoulder. But I think in the recipe, I'm gonna go 90 minutes, even for the 7-pound or the 8-pound. I think 90 minutes is gonna give you an easier time pulling it. We don't really wanna go much longer with the air crisping time, although you could probably go another 30 minutes with that. I think I'm gonna do the pressure cook time because right in the very center, it still wasn't pulling as tender, as it should, as easily as it should. So I'm gonna go up on the time to 90 minutes in the written recipe. All right, so let's go ahead and make up the sandwich here. I am using a homemade brioche bun, but you can use any bread that you like. Put a little barbecue sauce on there. Oh my gosh. And this is a homemade barbecue sauce. It's a 10-minute barbecue sauce. Make it in the blender, but you can make it on the stove too. It's so delicious. We serve this at our barbecue restaurant as well. All right, here we go. Oh my gosh, that is so good. And even though I think it needed to cook a little bit longer, it is super, super tender. And see, the meat I could take a bite and it didn't all fall out. Oh my gosh, this is absolutely perfect. I love the rub, I love the barbecue sauce, and I love making pork this way. Even though I prefer a little bit of a smoky flavor, so if I had my choice, I'd probably still use the smoker. But when it's snowing outside or really cold, or I just don't feel like babysitting for 10 hours, this is a great way to make a perfect pulled pork that you can serve to your family. Use whatever rub you want, use whatever sauce you want. As always, make it yours, make it delicious, and keep it real.